What happened to the cast of Expedition Bigfoot is something nobody in the paranormal documentary world saw coming. Russell Acord, Bryce Johnson, Ronnie LeBlanc, and Dr. Mireya Mayor built one of the most serious and scientifically ambitious Bigfoot investigations ever put on television. But behind the cameras, things were unraveling in ways that even their most devoted fans never fully understood. Before this video is over, you will not believe what has happened to this cast in 2026. The full story starts right now. Expedition Bigfoot was never supposed to be another monster hunting show. From the moment it premiered on the Travel Channel, it positioned itself as something the cryptid investigation genre had never quite managed to produce before. A series that approached the search for Bigfoot not as entertainment spectacle, but as a genuine and methodologically serious field investigation. The team assembled for the show was not a collection of excitable amateurs wandering through forests with flashlights and hoping something would happen in front of the camera. Russell Acord brought military intelligence experience and tactical field expertise that gave the investigations a structured discipline most shows in this space could never legitimately claim. Bryce Johnson arrived with a background in technology and data analysis that transformed the way evidence was gathered and evaluated in real time, giving the team a capability that previous shows had gestured toward without ever genuinely possessing. Ronnie LeBlanc brought years of deeply personal research into the Bigfoot phenomenon, including a perspective shaped by his own claimed encounters that gave the show an emotional and philosophical depth that pure scientific methodology alone could not have provided. And Dr. Mireya Mayor brought the kind of academic credibility, a primatology background, and real field research experience with undiscovered species that made even the most committed skeptics sit up and take the work seriously. Together, they were not just a television cast. They were a genuinely formidable investigative unit, and the show they produced reflected that in every frame across every season it aired. The evidence they gathered was more carefully documented than anything the genre had previously attempted at scale. Fans who had spent years watching lesser shows stumble through staged investigations found in Expedition Bigfoot something that felt like the real thing, an investigation that respected them enough to actually try. And the audience they built was not a casual one. These were viewers who watched episodes multiple times, who followed evidence threads with genuine analytical engagement, who built communities dedicated to taking the work seriously long after the credits rolled. Then something changed. The energy shifted in ways the audience could feel, but not name. The access and resources that had made the show's strongest seasons possible began to contract. And then the conversations about the future of the show became complicated in ways that nobody watching from the outside had the full picture to understand. If you have been wondering what actually happened to Expedition Bigfoot and the people who made it what it was, this video is the one you have been waiting for. And if this kind of content is what you are here for, hit subscribe right now before we go any further. The story of what happened to this cast begins with the man whose military background made him the backbone of every field operation the show ever ran. Russell Acord's story is next. Russell Acord was exactly the kind of person that Expedition Bigfoot needed in order to be taken seriously by anyone approaching it with genuine skepticism. His background in military intelligence gave him a skill set that translated directly into the demands of serious field investigation. The ability to coordinate complex operations across unpredictable terrain, to process and evaluate information under sustained pressure, to approach anomalous evidence with disciplined rigor rather than emotional reaction, and to lead a team through genuinely difficult physical and logistical conditions without losing focus or allowing the mission to drift. When viewers watched Acord move through the wilderness on Expedition Bigfoot, they were watching someone operating at a level of genuine competence that the genre almost never gets to put on camera. He was not performing expertise. He had it. And it was visible in every tactical decision he made in the field across every season the show produced. The version of Acord that the audience watched commanding field operations week after week was real. But it was not the complete picture. What the camera could not show, what television by its nature is structurally incapable of capturing, was what was happening to Acord outside of the investigation itself. The years of fieldwork the show demanded were not easy years for anyone on the team, but for Acord they carried a particular weight that came from the specific nature of what his role required. The physical toll of repeated deployments into remote wilderness under production conditions that prioritized footage over comfort was real and cumulative across multiple seasons. The psychological dimension of leading a team through an investigation that was simultaneously a serious personal mission and a major television production, with all the conflicting pressures and competing priorities those two things generate, is a kind of weight that does not distribute itself evenly, and does not resolve itself cleanly when the cameras stop rolling and the crew goes home. People who followed Acord closely during the run of the show began to notice the edges of something in his public presence that the episodes themselves were not capturing. There was a version of Russell Acord visible in interviews and social media and public appearances that carried the marks of a person navigating more than a television production. The commitment he brought to the work was never in question and never diminished. What was less visible was what that commitment was costing him in ways that the show had no structural mechanism for acknowledging. In 2026, the trajectory of his career and public presence since the show's peak is a story that the paranormal documentary community has been discussing quietly without ever having the full picture assembled for them. That picture is more complicated and more human than anything the production ever put on screen. Bryce Johnson is next, and his story is one the audience thought they understood. What was actually happening tells a very different story. Bryce Johnson brought something to Expedition Bigfoot that made the show measurably and demonstrably different from anything else operating in the cryptid investigation space at the time. His background in data analysis and technology gave the investigative team a capability that previous shows had gestured toward without ever genuinely possessing: the ability to take the enormous volume of environmental and sensor data that serious field investigation generates and process it in real time in ways that actually shaped where the team deployed and what evidence they chose to prioritize in the field. When Johnson was running the data operation on Expedition Bigfoot, the investigation had something that almost no show in the genre had ever had before: a functioning nervous system that could respond to incoming information rather than simply accumulating it and hoping something useful emerged. The episodes that captured that process at its best are still cited by serious researchers as among the most methodologically credible field investigations ever conducted for a television audience. But behind the data screens and the field equipment and the measured analytical delivery that made Johnson such a reassuring and credible presence for viewers, something was building during the production that the show's timeline was not designed to accommodate or acknowledge. The pace of Expedition Bigfoot was relentless in ways that people who have never been inside a major field production rarely appreciate from the outside. Multiple deployments per season, each one in genuinely remote and physically demanding terrain. Each one generating enormous volumes of raw data that required sustained analytical focus to process meaningfully while the production clock continued moving forward regardless of what the evidence required. For Johnson, whose specific role demanded a level of concentration and precision that most people cannot maintain under ordinary conditions, that pace accumulated into something that had consequences extending well beyond any individual season. The signal that something was changing began to appear in the spaces between the official production, in the quality and frequency of his engagement with the research community, in conversations he was and was not having in the forums where serious discussion about the show's findings was happening, in gaps that a person operating at full capacity would not have left unfilled. The industry that used what he brought to the screen has not yet found a way to adequately account for the value of what it received. That imbalance is part of the story that has never been fully told. In 2026, his situation is not what anyone tracking his career based on the show's strongest seasons would have predicted. His capability did not diminish. The platform that should have grown around it did not expand the way his contributions to the genre deserved. Coming up, Ronnie LeBlanc. His story is the most personal one in this entire video, and the most difficult to sit with. Ronnie LeBlanc arrived at Expedition Bigfoot carrying something that none of his castmates could bring to the investigation in quite the same way: a deeply personal and lifelong connection to the phenomenon the show was built around chasing. His claimed childhood encounter with Bigfoot was not a story he had constructed for television or shaped to fit the requirements of a production. It was the foundational experience of his life, the event that had shaped his intellectual and spiritual development for decades before a camera was ever pointed in his direction, and the driving force behind years of independent research that had earned him genuine respect in serious Bigfoot research circles long before the Travel Channel came calling. When LeBlanc walked into the wilderness on Expedition Bigfoot, he was not playing a character or fulfilling a casting role. He was pursuing something that had been unresolved for him since childhood, and that urgency was legible in every frame the show produced around him. The audience felt it instinctively. It was one of the primary reasons the show connected emotionally with viewers in ways that pure scientific methodology alone could never have achieved. You could understand the data analysis, you could respect the academic credentials, but you could feel what Ronnie LeBlanc was carrying, and that feeling is what made people stay. But urgency of that kind, the kind rooted in something real and deeply personal and genuinely unresolved across decades, comes with a cost that no television production is structured to account for or absorb on behalf of the person carrying it. Each season that ended without a definitive answer to the question LeBlanc had been living with since childhood was not simply a narrative cliffhanger for viewers at home. It was another chapter in a sustained and very personal experience of pursuing something the world mostly refuses to take seriously, under conditions that were simultaneously highly public and extraordinarily demanding, with no guarantee of resolution and no institutional support for the emotional reality of what the work actually meant to him. Fans who engaged with LeBlanc, both on the show and in the wider research community, began to notice the weight of that accumulation in the years following the show's peak. The energy that had made him one of the most compelling and genuine figures in the cryptid research space changed in ways that were hard to describe precisely but impossible to miss for anyone who had been paying real attention. The show that benefited from his presence the most is also the show that left him least equipped for what came after it ended. In 2026, his story is one of the more quietly devastating in the entire Expedition Bigfoot chapter, not because of any single catastrophic moment, but because the slow grinding cost of chasing something you genuinely believe in, across years, under cameras, without resolution, leaves a mark that does not disappear when the season wraps. Dr. Mireya Mayor is next, and her story changes the entire picture. Dr. Mireya Mayor was the element that made Expedition Bigfoot structurally impossible to dismiss for anyone approaching it with genuine intellectual honesty. Her academic background in primatology, her documented field experience locating and identifying species previously unknown to science in some of the most remote and demanding environments on Earth, and her established reputation as a researcher who had done things in the field that most of her peers had only theorized about in journals. All of it combined to give the show a layer of credibility that no other program operating in the cryptid space had ever been able to legitimately claim. When Mayor assessed a piece of evidence on camera, it was not the enthusiasm of a true believer speaking. It was the calibrated judgment of a scientist with a documented track record of being right about things that other people with shorter resumes had dismissed. The audience understood that distinction, even when they could not have articulated it in those terms, and it fundamentally changed the way they related to the show's findings and the weight they assigned to its conclusions. What the audience could not see was the full complexity of what Mayor was managing outside of the investigation itself. The demands placed on a person of her professional standing by a high-profile paranormal television production are not simple or uncomplicated in any dimension. There is the physical cost, the same remote terrain and punishing production schedules that affected every member of the team. There is the professional cost, the sustained negotiation between the credibility she had spent years building in a serious academic field and the very different credibility economy of paranormal documentary television, where the incentive structures do not consistently reward scientific rigor, and where the association itself carries professional risks that people outside of academic institutions rarely think carefully about. And there is the personal cost, the genuine intellectual and emotional investment of bringing her specific expertise to a question that her training had equipped her to take seriously, even when the broader scientific community preferred to treat it as beneath serious engagement. Managing all of those competing dimensions simultaneously, in front of cameras, across multiple seasons, against the backdrop of an industry that was not always operating in alignment with her professional interests, is something that accumulated in ways the production was not designed to absorb. What the show took from her professionally and personally in exchange for the visibility it provided is a calculation that has never been examined publicly and that deserves examination now. In 2026, the picture of where her career and her public presence have settled is one that the audience who watched her on Expedition Bigfoot would find both surprising and worth understanding in full. Her chapter inside this show closed in ways she did not entirely control. The investigation that redefined everything comes next. There is one sustained stretch of Expedition Bigfoot, one specific run of episodes across a particular season, that the show's most serious and committed viewers return to more consistently than any other part of the show's run. Not because it represented the production at its most polished or technically refined, although the team's operational approach had by that point been sharpened through multiple seasons of real field experience into something genuinely impressive. Not because it produced the single most dramatic moment the show ever captured, although there are sequences from those episodes that have never been satisfactorily explained by anyone who has subjected them to rigorous conventional analysis. Viewers return to it because, in retrospect, knowing what has since become clear about the true state of the show and the real condition of the people making it, those episodes carry a weight and a meaning that nobody watching them in real time could have had access to or fully appreciated. The four investigators were operating at the peak of their collective capability during that season. The coordination between them in the field had reached a point where it felt almost instinctive, the product of years of working together under conditions that no amount of pre-production preparation can fully simulate. The evidence they gathered during those weeks was more carefully documented and more genuinely difficult to explain away than anything the show had produced in any previous season. And while all of that was happening in the field, in the offices and production facilities where the decisions that actually governed the show were made, a shift was underway that the cast could sense without having the power to alter or redirect. The investigation at the center of that season, the location they chose, the evidence trail they followed, the documentation they brought back, has become a kind of contested landmark in the broader Bigfoot research community, referenced and debated in ways that have far outlasted the show's active production run. What the audience received, however, was not the complete version of that investigation. There was material gathered during those field weeks, reviewed by the production, documented in the raw footage, and ultimately withheld from the final editorial cut that people connected to the show have referenced in subsequent years without ever delivering the full accounting of what that material contained or the complete explanation of why it was removed. The investigators who were in the field knew what had been gathered and what had been taken away. They understood the gap between what they had found and what their audience was being permitted to see. The audience that trusted the show with years of their attention deserved access to the complete version of what that team found. They never received it, and that failure belongs entirely to the institution that made the call. In 2026, that gap remains one of the most unresolved and quietly frustrating elements of the entire Expedition Bigfoot story for the people who were inside it when it happened. When Expedition Bigfoot went quiet, so did the people who made it. Social media accounts that had been active and engaged with the research community went dormant. Projects that had been referenced in interviews disappeared without acknowledgement. Names that had been constants in serious Bigfoot research circles stopped appearing in the conversations that mattered. The fans noticed immediately. Comment sections on archived episodes filled with questions nobody was answering. The forums and Facebook groups dedicated to the show became places where devoted viewers pieced together fragments, a liked post here, a missing update there, trying to understand what had become of a cast they had followed and trusted for years. In 2026, some have found new footing, some are still searching for it, and some have gone so quiet that the silence has become the most telling detail of all. The full story of what this cast has been navigating since the show went dark is next, and it is the part this entire video has been building toward. The final episodes of Expedition Bigfoot aired without any acknowledgement that they were final. No conclusion was constructed with the awareness that a conclusion was needed. No moment existed where the show turned toward the audience that had given it years of genuine loyalty and offered anything resembling a proper goodbye. It simply stopped. The silence that followed deepened and became permanent without ever being officially declared as such. Fans organized. They pushed back through every channel available to them. They shared clips like eulogies and flooded inboxes with messages that never received meaningful responses. The network said nothing of substance. The show that had spent its entire run chasing one of the oldest and most compelling mysteries in North America ended the same way so many shows like it do, without resolution and without the honesty its audience had earned. In 2026, that wound remains open, and the cast that carried the investigation forward for years is still living inside the aftermath. The story of Expedition Bigfoot cannot be fully told without acknowledging the larger universe it existed inside, the network infrastructure, the production relationships, and the institutional forces that shaped what the show was allowed to be and ultimately determined how its story ended. Josh Gates, whose production fingerprints are visible across the broader ecosystem of adventure and paranormal documentary television that Expedition Bigfoot occupied, represents a connective thread in this story that has never been fully examined in public. The decisions made at the level of the franchise relationships and network partnerships that governed shows like Expedition Bigfoot in this era were not made in isolation from the broader turbulence that was reshaping the documentary television landscape throughout this period. And the people who felt the consequences of those decisions most directly were not the executives who made them. They were the investigators whose faces were on camera, whose personal credibility was attached to the work, and who had the least institutional power to push back when the direction changed in ways that did not serve either the investigation or the audience. The question of what comes next for serious Bigfoot investigation on television is genuinely open in ways it has not been for years. The genre is not dead. The audience that Expedition Bigfoot built has not dispersed. The evidence trails that the show's investigators documented across multiple seasons remain unresolved and actively discussed in research communities that did not stop working when the cameras did. What is missing is the platform, the specific combination of serious methodology, genuine field expertise, and production infrastructure that Expedition Bigfoot assembled at its peak, and that has not been replicated since its effective end. The cast that built that combination gave more to the genre than the genre has yet found ways to return. Russell Acord gave it operational discipline and field credibility that money cannot simply purchase. Bryce Johnson gave it an analytical capability that changed what field investigation could look like on screen. Ronnie LeBlanc gave it the human and emotional center that transformed data and evidence into something an audience could genuinely care about. And Dr. Mireya Mayor gave it the scientific legitimacy that made it impossible to dismiss even for viewers who arrived with deep skepticism and every intention of leaving it intact. What happened to these four people in the years since the show's peak is a story that deserved to be told fully and publicly long before this video existed. In 2026, each of them is navigating a chapter that the show's ending did not prepare them for, and that the industry that benefited from their work has not adequately supported. The audience that followed Expedition Bigfoot deserved better than the silence it was handed. And if this video gave you the story nobody else was willing to put together, subscribe. There is always more.